Hey guys, welcome to our LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook Live this fine Monday morning here. I'm coming to you from Tahiti, French Polynesia, and my guest, Chris Shambrook, today from England. So looking forward to our conversation today. Chris, how are you doing, my dear friend, good friend?
Yeah, I'm very good. I am sort of dealing with the depressing weather that exists at the moment in this country, but yeah, just coming towards the end of the working day and sort of starting the week and doing very well, thank you. So, and really, thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we're here in Tahiti. We're just the starting of our rainy season as well. So luckily, yesterday and today looks like a good weather, but it's always a little bit of a gamble how the weather goes. But I'm originally from Finland, so I know all about that type of weather.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good one, good one. So just really quickly, couple housekeeping rules for people that are jumping into our live and coming to view us. So if you are watching us from Facebook or either from YouTube, but especially from LinkedIn, what we'll be doing today is we'll be having this conversation with Chris for about 30 to 40 minutes. And then after that sort of 30 to 40-minute mark, we'll be taking some and answering some questions. So if you have any burning ideas, questions, insights that come along during this chat and this conversation, please feel free to leave them into the chat and we'll try to pick something up from there towards the end of the conversation. And we'll see how we can answer the best of our abilities those questions. But definitely after the live, then we'll come around to the chat box and answer some of those questions. But let's get going. Let's put the kind of the show on the road, if you will, Chris, and let's start from somewhere. And I always like to start these conversations from a little bit of a childhood memories, if you will, and for a little bit of a context for people that may not know you or have been living under the rock, especially in the LinkedIn sphere where you are active. Who was Chris Shambrook at 16? What was your sort of environment that you grew up in and sort of your thought processes and so on and so forth? And in that same token, who were the sort of maybe mentors or coaches or people that you looked up to and that you learned from? So maybe we can start from there.
Yeah, it seems a long time ago now, Tomo. So it's a long time ago. So at 16, I was a pretty sport mad 16-year-old. So if there was sport that I could play, I would be playing it. I spent most of my time playing football. So I was playing quite a lot, 3-4 times a week. I probably had aspirations of playing professionally at the time and had some kind of dream of being a striker, scoring lots of goals, because I'd had a pretty decent sort of junior career, but as you can be a sort of a relatively big fish in a small pond, you know, as you're growing up. And but I was also playing a lot of basketball and but definitely team sports were definitely my thing at the time. So I was very inspired by that. I was finishing my qualifications to go on to sort of, you know, pre-university qualifications in the UK. So I was kind of starting to think about maybe what I wanted to do. I think I probably had, if I wasn't going to be a professional sports person, I was possibly thinking about being a physio or teaching in and around sort of physical education. And yeah, so it was very much a good middle class white English upbringing just outside Cambridge, you know, university town, decent sixth form college I was about to go to. And, you know, so it was a lot of fun, not a lot of pressure. I was pretty okay academically and I was doing okay. And from a mentor teacher wise, there were probably a few teachers at school who made an impression, who, because they made the learning fun, I think they were kind of good influences. One of them a terrible influence, because I enjoyed the maths so much. I chose to carry on studying it only to find out I was utterly useless at it. But the enjoyment of the classes that I'd had at the earlier age had made me competent enough to feel that I might actually sort of, you know, enjoy that. So, but yeah, PE teachers, coaches, teachers, they were definitely people who were influencing me. And I think in a way, it's always been people who have sort of paid an interest in me and sort of invested some time in me who I've always been influenced by as well. So that was a kind of a pattern that had started at secondary school, but definitely, you know, pretty decent academically, and, you know, sport mad and would play sport all the time. I was outside more than I was inside, and I was kind of looking forward to seeing what happened next at 16. So yeah, that was pretty much it, I think.
Nice one. For my personal interest, the curiosity, because you obviously you got a very psychological mind and psychologist, and a lot of the times we don't combine that sort of sports madness to this psychology. If you, I mean, there are some that we look up to, but was that always that you had with you, or did that develop in your older years, if you will?
Yeah, I remember sort of growing up, I sort of, learning to spell. I liked the word psychology because it was a little bit different. So I do kind of remember being tuned into that. But as I went into sort of getting ready to go to university and ended up doing a sports science degree, that's when the psychology and the sport and the coaching and the performance really started to kind of blend together for me. And definitely felt I had an aptitude for understanding the psychology principles and being able to get my own head around them, as well as put my own spin on them. But I also, a little bit later on at university, I was coaching basketball as well as playing it. And so that, as soon as you start coaching something rather than just performing, that makes a bit of a difference. But I also got involved in a couple of studies as well. So the person who went on to be my PhD supervisor, he was doing some studies. So I was a participant in some of his psychology studies, and that being involved in it again just opened my mind up to, hey, this is quite interesting stuff. I wonder, what I can do with this. And so I actively put myself in some situations, but also had an aptitude for it and started enjoying it as well. And, I think just that coaching bit was really interesting, helping other people be prepared to perform, but you then not being able to do it. It's as much about the mind as it is about the tactics and the playbooks and the kind of, the fitness levels.
Yeah, I love that. There's already a lot of stuff that I wanted to take out of there, but let's set the context for today's conversation. So then, if you sort of fast forward from those sort of school days, if you will, early 20s and so on and so forth to this time, you're running a Planet K2, which is a performance-based consulting coaching business, if you will, or company.
Yeah.
And now you've been in the Olympic Games as a performance psychologist and expert over there for team GB, if you will. And obviously you've tracked a lot. You have a wealth of experience and knowledge about performance and how people play at that level in business as well as in sport, not just in sport, obviously.
Yeah.
So let's start from there. Is there a sort of easier, quicker way to define? I had a look at your TEDx talk where you sort of defined performance really nicely, if you will. Let's start from there. So how do you define performance to someone that's just think that it's outcomes and it's like high performance? And I think there's so much more to it.
Meaning of words and how we use them, and then how we sort of seek to develop our sort of interaction with them is really important. So at Planet K2, ever since 2003, we were formed. We basically help people get a clear definition of performance and results, the difference between the two, but the power of understanding the relationship between the two. And working in Olympic sport, performance is actually all the preparation. It's about creating performance capacity. If you're working in a theatre, putting on a play, you're helping put on a performance, but you have to rehearse and practice and develop the performance capability to then put on the show, the performance for the audience to see what the result is and if they like it. So for us, performance is always doing the things you need to do to get the results that you want, that difference between the input and the output. And there's so many times that the word performance is used when people are really referring to the output. How's your performance this month in a sales setting? They're not asking performance. They're saying, what are your numbers? How the numbers stacking up? Are you on track? But in the world of sport, where you compete relatively little, particularly Olympic sport, but prepare a lot and develop performance a lot, it's really important to know the difference between the two. You are performing in order to try and get a result when you have those moments of competition. But in the commercial world, you're on the field of play all the time. So there's very much a result focus, and we're trying to perform when the scoreboard is in front of our eyes all of the time. So the performance and the results get merged much more in a commercial world, whereas in the sport world, it's a lot easier to separate them out and look at the causality. If I can improve performance, will I improve results? Will I improve a score as well as the ultimate win? Will I run faster, but will I actually finish higher up in the race? So we got all sorts of different outcomes, but that performance results connection is critical, because it then says, where do you want to invest your time in order to gain more control and confidence over the result? Don't talk about the result. Talk about developing the performance and the knowledge and the understanding, the confidence that you'll do the things that you need to do. And if you're able to do that, more often than not, the result will be one which you will be more pleased with it, or at least you'll understand how you got it and what the limitations were. So that differentiation sits at the heart of us as a business, and leads to some really important conversations and making sure people are investing their sort of time and efforts in the most effective way when there's an ambition to keep growing.
Yeah, I love that. And I have a very much a sort of semi-professional background as well, from basketball and tennis and football as well. So we share common things there. And I think, in this sport world, that quote unquote differentiation is possibly easier, if you will. But then when it comes to that business world, and you just so nicely put it there, that we're sort of in the results all the time. That's what we're looking at. So how would you help someone out? What is that sort of mindset, or how do you differentiate, especially in that business setting, for people like, hey, there's a performance and the results, and they're kind of different slightly? How do you start making that separation for people in the business world?
Yeah, so I think what we'll often do is we'll talk to people about, a quick evaluation of the recent history. So if we look at your scoreboard, how often did you get the result and you'd say we won on the result? And how often would you say, but we also won on the performance? So in terms of our satisfaction with how well we did the inputs, we get a tick in that column as well. And if we can get a tick in both columns, that shows we're probably in pretty good shape. But once you start interrogating the recent history, people quickly see that we got the result, but I'm not sure the performance warrants a tick. There were some things there that weren't up to standard, or they're not sustainable, or, and actually we're not particularly proud of some of those things, or we just got lucky. Actually, we didn't perform very well, but the scoreboard looked all right. So you can get that situation. You can often get a situation where, we think performance-wise we were great, but the scoreboard doesn't show that, and that's frustrating. And there's loads of times where that's the case. And then there are occasions when both the performance and the result weren't good. So no surprise, we didn't do the inputs very well, and the outputs didn't sort of track that. The outputs tracked, we weren't very satisfied with those either. So we tend to do a bit of reflection. You just say, well, let's look at the evidence, because from what we get from the world of performance sport is we're trying to take control of the relationship between input and output rather than reacting all the time. We're trying to get ahead of the game. So we'd like to have the situation where when we win on the performance, we're increasingly confident we'll win on the result, or at least get a score, or at least get the result as well. So that for us is a really important way of just helping people reflect upon recent history and get a sense of, right, okay, maybe that's a useful way of looking at it. And if we're going to change the conversation going forward, will you do that by telling people what result that you want, or will you do it by talking to them and supporting about the performance characteristics that you believe are present more of the time when we see the results that are going to make us proud? So that way works really practically and really effectively.
Love it. And then here's, because I've we can also sort of tie that performance side of things into growth, if you will. Like, that's, at least in my case, I'm looking at growth. Like, if I'm growing, more than likely I'm also performing well. But then as especially someone like yourself who's dealing with the cream of the crop, if you will, the top performers, like, that outcome matters. There's just no way around it. Like,
absolutely.
The higher the stakes are in business, sport, or what have you, there's a lot of pressure from media, from so on and so forth. Those outcomes are what the other people are watching over, right? Like, that's what they're after.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of like interesting dance in the balance between, like, you know, I
There
want
is,
to grow.
but the sports psychology literature and a lot of the psychology literature is really helpful on that, because it talks about having an ego orientation and a task orientation. So my ego is I just want to beat other people, and my competitive drive is about showing that I'm better than others. And the task orientation is actually about my own growth and my mastery over my art. And people who are enduringly successful tend to be high in both. So the best people I've worked with, you know, they are out and out competitive beasts, and it's great because you know what they want to win, but they want to win against themselves as much as they want to win against other people, and they know how to balance the two challenges to keep getting the growth. If we just focus on the ego, that we may miss some of the opportunity to have the growth in ourselves, and if we just focus on the task, we may miss some of the energy that comes from testing ourselves out against the great role models, the great competitors who we aspire to, you know, take on and overcome in the end. So, but it's really important to recognize that task and ego focus are really helpful. They're neither good nor bad, but they are both useful in driving the curiosity of solving the problem of how do I keep getting better at both performance and result. And when we've got that, it's really powerful. But I've seen lots of people who definitely suffer from outcome hijack. They're so focused on the result and beating other people that their head is constantly asking the question, will I win? Will I beat them? So they're not able to attend to the here and now. And it takes quite a lot of practice to take that massive desire to win and get the outcome and channel it back into the here and now and a true performance focus. And sometimes that's easier than others. And, you know, whether you're doing that on your own or with other people, that can make a difference. But it's a great challenge to take on and recognize your own wiring, you know, which do you have a bias for? How might the other one complement? But you've got a package of competitive drivers there to really learn about and draw on and be fuel for your pursuit of success, however you define that.
Oh, I love that. I love that sort of differentiation, yet bringing them both into the same package. And I suppose that's also the difference with the people that from the sports world, that they win one championship, they get to a podium, and the next season they're not there anymore. Versus the people that they win something and then they still have the drive, the hunger to grow and get better. And those are the people that you find in the podiums year after year, I suppose. So
yeah, and managing the challenge of, you know, them being someone who's got a target on their back versus someone who is trying to make a name for themselves. You know, so actually, if you feel that I've been successful, perhaps the distraction of now protecting that rather than playing freely gets in the way. So you become more outcome focused again. And you know, there's some really interesting stuff, you know, the psychology of winning after winning, some research 30 years ago or so more, you know, which is, you know, people who win unexpectedly get distracted by a lot of the other things that come with the winning. You know, there's a lot of other attention that gets paid, and, you know, so you perhaps aren't as focused on the recipe that got you there, or you're not able to manage the you know, the challenges and the draws on your time as effectively. So, you know, a lot of it is about learning to maybe get back to the recipe of the successful performance and growth. And it'd be nice to have some amnesia. I've got the confidence that I have done it, but I'm not just, you know, but I've forgotten that I've done it in the same way. So you still got that kind of curiosity to go again. And, you know, I wonder how good I can be.
yeah, great one. So let's take something from there. Especially you mentioned about the ego. I think that's a big word for a lot of people, and a lot of people sort of wrestle with that, you know, how to go around it. But you also talk a lot about confidence, and I think that's a good sort of bridge to get into this next segment, if you will. And you know, when we look from the outside in for someone who is performing, who's, you know, getting all these results and podiums, either in the sport or in the business world, we think that they are highly confident, right? Now, from your perspective, because you're in it, you're there with the best of the best, if you will, how confident they truly are, like, or another way, I think a better question is how much they train that confidence side of things. And then sort of the follow-up on that is that, especially these days with this, there's a lot of talk about this whole thing about imposter syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
and how does that relate to then to the confidence side, especially with the high performers, and do they, let's put it this way, maybe this will be the easiest way to put it, like how much these high performers suffer or experience this imposter syndrome, or either how do they deal with it
Yeah,
and get
yeah,
back on track.
yeah.
There's a lot there, but yeah,
There
maybe
is,
you can
there
say
is.
something.
The confidence area is really interesting because again, you can get confidence from your own development and you can get confidence from results. So I think it's important that you, again, it comes back to the competitiveness. It's a similar frame really, but you know, if from a personality perspective, you're able to tune into where do I get my confidence from? Is there one source more than another? Because if it's from the result, that's fine. There's no problem with that. I just might need to balance getting some confidence from the performance as well as the result. If I'm getting confidence from my growth and my development, I still want to be able to get confidence that can translate through to being successful from a comparison point of view. So for all of us, it's very helpful to take both those sources of confidence and not become reliant upon just one of them. And so athletes do get the chance to grow their confidence through the series of daily tests, weekly tests that, you know, in training, I'm confident that I'm becoming more consistent in my, you know, technique. I'm confident that my scores that I see are becoming more stable. I'm confident that I'm trying less but getting similar numbers. So I can start to use the evidence to build a foundation of belief in self and belief in my capability. Now, that doesn't mean that you always then believe that that's going to translate through into the successful delivery in competition. So we have to then develop the confidence that I can take practice performance into competitive performance. Am I confident that what I do in preparation will be replicated in the white heat of competition? So we're just trying to build layers of belief that I have the capability and the capacity, and those things can be done in the different contexts. And that's really important to think about, you know, practicing those skills. And in the commercial world, that's why it's really important, again, to be thinking about, you know, if I'm on the field of play all the time, I've got to be really confident in terms of how I'm setting myself up to succeed and what success looks like from a performance point of view. And I also have to be confident that I'm sort of, you know, aiming for the right outcomes as well. So I often ask people a couple of things, you know, if we get to a critical performance moment, ask yourself the question, am I confident that by being myself today, it will be enough? Because if I know I've done the preparation and I'm confident that by being myself today, it will be enough, I'll show up and perform and I'll give everything, I'll give myself the best chance of succeeding. We're trying to get some freedom coming to be yourself. So we've got that. Are you confident by being yourself, it will be enough? The other question I ask a lot is, are you confident that you'll do what you say you're going to do? Because you go through the preparation, you come up with a plan. Are you confident that you'll follow through and you'll retain the belief in that plan? And you'll retain the belief that that plan is also get the foundation for flexing and reacting and responding depending upon what happens in front of you. If we've got those two things in place, our preparation is about reinforcing the growing confidence that by being ourselves, it will be enough at any point in time, as well as being confident that we're practicing doing what we say we're going to do. But the great thing about the imposter syndrome, which I often see, you see a lot of high performers have very perfectionist tendencies as well, never satisfied, always setting a high standard for themselves. Whenever they've performed and got a result, they'll always say, I could have done better, it should have been different. It's that combination of knowing that I will be good enough, knowing that by being myself it'll be good enough, knowing that I'll do what I say I'm going to do, but ultimately knowing you're going to want more and making sure that confidence doesn't undermine the progress, because that's the bit along with a lot of times with maladaptive perfectionism or perhaps imposter syndrome, we sometimes sabotage the creative confidence value. And so we get a good performance and a good result, but I was lucky, anyone could have done that, you know, I should have done more. So that's the bit you have to guard against, So the people who are very successful typically have very high standards, and may don't fully believe that, you know, they've earned the right to be there. You just got to give them the skills to, well, look, try and become flawless at your evaluation of the performance. Try and demonstrate that you can learn better than anyone else from the process you've just been through. Because if we can do that, we'll feed forward with an updated belief system, which is an increase in confidence. So it's a really interesting area, and one that I always think, you know, for most of us, we suffer from a high degree of healthy paranoia. We're always worried we're not going to be good enough anyway. We may as well embrace it, but then kind of go, so what do I want to do to make sure that doesn't feel so uncomfortable so often? Right. You know, I'll accept this is a part of the drive, but I'll take care of myself along the way, and I'll involve other people to help me get some balanced reflection that leads to the ongoing updating of my confidence model. So it's a long answer, but I think there's a lot in there.
Well, there was a lot in there for sure. So anybody listening or watching this on live or replay, just go and review that. There was a lot there, and I think there was a lot of key messages I picked up. The first one was like, where do I get my confidence from? That's a powerful question right there. Yeah. But I think the other one is this sort of overarching idea that nobody's confident all the time, right? Like it's something that we need to train and practice. And I suppose, you know, the best of the best, or when you're on that high level, you're fortunate that, or not even, but you've been able to cultivate that network of coaches, mentors, support system around you, that then when the confidence kind of lacks a little bit, or you're in your down days, you're able to get back up and spring back up onto the field of play.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is you know, high performance is often a balance of paradoxes. So you know, you get these hugely confident people that are incredibly insecure as well, and that's a really great place to be able to accept that. You know, if you really push me, I've got a lot of belief, but I'm also desperately insecure that it might all disappear tomorrow and I might not be able to replicate it anymore. So when you know that you've got these almost opposing forces that are part of your character, it's about accepting that and kind of going, right, how do I manage to use that kind of insecurity in a productive manner? And how do I use the confidence to really bring value and drive, but don't let it tip over into complacency? And if you can get the balance right between the two, it really works. But it's just not always going to be comfortable. And high performance isn't really a particularly comfortable place, because you're asking yourself to do unreasonable things.
Right.
But I think as long as you bring some of that balance and sometimes choosing to shift the balance, it can add a lot of value.
Yeah, there's so much we could dive deeper into it, but like I love that idea that, well, this is my sort of framework or thinking about it, that the self-belief is almost like that's underneath of the confidence. The confidence is kind of the byproduct of our self-beliefs and our actions and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and so one of the early bits of mental toughness research I was involved in about 24 years ago, we were looking at sort of highly successful sports people, and one of the interesting things that came out for those people who were described as mentally tough was that they weren't necessarily super confident, but the confidence they did have, they didn't let go. So they didn't lose confidence easily. So there was not a sense of fragile confidence that, you know, it might not have been super high, but there's these core beliefs that I have, and it's really tough for me to lose belief in this technical capacity, this particular competitive characteristic that I've got, or, you know, there were some core things that made sure that confidence didn't go absent completely. Whereas other people were much more kind of up and down. You got these people who didn't lose it and then could gradually build it little by little. And I think that's also something, because there's so much in the literature that is kind of going, you know, have a massive goal and believe that you're going to be this amazing person and work towards it. It's just like, well, you know, the reality is you're going to start from a level, understand what got you there, protect that, and then enjoy seeing how you can add that with a high level of ambition to ultimately see where you get to. But maybe don't start with the absurdly large goal and then be disappointed all the way along the line. But again, it works differently for different personalities.
Yeah, I love that. There's a, you know, I just wrote about something recently, something called the sort of the baseline performance, which kind of goes hand in hand with what you just mentioned, that we gradually building that baseline up, and then all of a sudden we operate from such a high space, from a high level, that looking at the kind of, quote unquote, lack of a better word, average performer, who's kind of starting point is a lot lower. So when you start from that high baseline, it's you're able to jump a lot higher.
Yeah, and there's something really important to get to the level of self-acceptance that says, if I do not try today and I just rely on the baseline that I've built, how good will I be? Because I need to work out how good I am when I'm not really trying. Because if I work out how good I am when I'm not really trying, that gives me some insight into, the value of what's there. And now when I start putting additional focus, additional effort, additional intellect into what I'm doing, I'm adding value to that. And so I'm interested in my ability to upgrade from, actually upgrade the baseline, but upgrade my ability to use what's in the baseline.
Right.
And that's a really powerful kind of combination that people get into.
Yeah.
That's probably nicked a little bit from Jürgen Grober and Steve Redgrave. Philosophy that on their worst day they wanted to be better than anyone else in the rest of the world.
Wow.
Yeah. So on your worst day, if it doesn't work for you, you've still got all this talent that you've built, and if that is still good enough to beat anyone else in the rest of the world, that's great. So, but then how much do you want to be able to sort of add on to that, so that on your best day? But actually, that means that the difference between best and worst is probably you're trying to do this rather than that, where the difference between best and worst is pretty high for some people.
Yeah, and then all right, that's a good one. There's let's leave that to simmer over there and pivot into something that you mentioned there a little bit about that idea of comfort. And there's this one of my sort of most interesting posts that I read from you was this. Well, there's a lot, but I think it was months ago. You talked a lot about this comfort zone, and there's this. I wrote about it a couple of years ago as well, the myth of the comfort zone, if you will, and there's this idea that we want to be out of our comfort zone, and that's where the growth happens, and nothing grows in the comfort zone. And I'm always a bit like, and really, and we look at sort of sports world, like you look at we need to be resting, and recovery is fundamentally key for us, and so on and so forth. But speak about a little bit about that sort of maybe the myth of the comfort zone, especially in sort of the new age world that we're living in, that we think that we need to be out of it.
The comfort zone is the performance zone ultimately that you're trying to get into. And from a high performance sport perspective, we're trying to create that capacity and confidence that by being myself today, it's going to be enough. So I really need to be able to be comfortable with that version of excellence that's been created. Now, if I want to grow that baseline capability through training, I'm going to get out of my comfort zone. The whole premise of physical training is about working the body so that it has to make adaptations, and then in the rest and the recovery, the body grows back stronger. But you have to get the balance right between getting out of the comfort zone, resting and recovering, so that you expand it. And the notion that there isn't any growth out, sort of within the comfort zone is nonsense, because you actually become more efficient at using what's there. You can grow the ease with which you can access what has been built. And so, you see the best performers are incredibly efficient at accessing the talent that has been built, but that doesn't come. You've still got to practice accessing your ability. But they get the balance right as well between when am I going to get out of my comfort zone for growth, but what am I going to do to rest and recover so the growth can happen? And so you look at the great coaches and the great physiologists and the great strength and conditioning coaches, they are fantastic at putting training programs together that allow athletes to challenge the body in such a way that they are out of a comfort zone in such a way that when the relaxation and rest happens, the maximum growth happens. But if you get that wrong, you burn out. If you get it wrong, you end up with muscle damage. If you get it wrong, you end up not peaking at the right time for a significant competition. So if you look at it through the physical lens, it's about managing the use of the comfort zone and outside of the comfort zone, along with brilliant recovery, brilliant learning, but also enjoying the new efficiencies. So I working with the rowers over the years, the coaches and the rowers were brilliant at seeing there's phases of training which is really brutal, and they've got to get through it and survive it because they're outside their comfort zone all the time. But then there's periods of consolidation and letting that bed in. And then there's periods of thriving where you're easing back on the challenge and you're letting the capacity bubble up. And we can do that in any world, commercial world as well. Where are we going to go all in hard and we've got to get through it? But then we consolidate to really grow. And then we look forward to a period where we can take advantage of that and really thrive and enjoy finding out how well we can use the talent that we've created. So I like that kind of survive, consolidate, thrive mindset, but getting the timing of that right and being brilliant at surviving, brilliant at consolidating, and brilliant at thriving, because they're all skill sets.
Yeah. So obviously, like, again, taking it from the sports world, it's probably easier to see that differentiation between, okay, now I'm practice, I'm going hard at it, and now I'm rest and recovering.
Yeah.
What about sort of in the business world? I suppose this sort of looming word of burnout is being thrown out a lot, and people are just, they don't really respect, or they don't maybe even understand how much recovery is needed.
Yeah.
And then we are pushing ourselves all the time, like, and I suppose that's where the, lack of a better word, balance, or maybe the ratios come into play.
Yeah.
How do you see that in how do you see that in the business world? Like, what would be the good ratios of quote unquote out of comfort zone versus within it?
Yeah. So I think the way around it is trying to look ahead as far as you can in the horizon of your diary, and work out what the effort requirement is for the various phases of business performance you're about to go into. So you take sales as a good example. There's a natural rhythm to sales through the month, through the quarter, and we know that there's periods of greater intensity and sort of less intense. But if we can look ahead, it's a little bit like, you know, the racing profiles in the Tour de France. We can have a look and see where are the big hills, where are the flats, where's the downhills. In your diary, can you get a sense of, based upon me and my talent and what's being asked of me, which are the really tough periods where I'm putting a lot of effort in because this is something I need to dig deep for? When are there periods where I'm actually more within my confident zone and I can actually trust my capability more? Where are there periods where I'm actually excited and I'm really looking forward to getting in there, so there's energy giving? If we look ahead at that, we can then be more mindful of, right, well, this week is going to be a 10 out of 10 effort because I'm going to have to try really hard. So I need to know what 10 out of 10 recovery looks like. So I'm going to have to invest more in the sleep, the nutrition, the hydration, you know, other forms of rest and recovery. This next week after that is a 6 out of 10 week. So I need to know what my 6 out of 10 recoveries are as well. If we can at least start to get a bit of an understanding of that, even if we can't plan it with, you know, out the likelihood of our diary getting changed, we still know what those phases look like. So if we get an unexpected high effort phase, we can then go to high recovery alongside that. If we get an unexpected ability to thrive, we're going to go, this is great. I know, you know, we can take advantage. So it's about looking ahead and see if you can become a little bit more mindful about the different effort levels and the different recovery tools and support that you're going to want around those predictable, not totally predictable, but relatively predictable shifts in effort and requirement in your diary.
Yeah, I love that. That Tour de France metaphor sits with me really well. I was running some trail races here not long ago, and I looked at topography of the hills and so on and so on. I was like, okay, there's a big climb there, and then it's going steeply down, and the next
and you know, and you know, in the Tour de France, they know when the feed stations are. They know,
exactly.
And the teams decide when they're going to get sort of, you know, the nutrition to them as well. So you know, it's a you're recovering as you go, as well as going as, you know, effectively as you need to for the stage. And you know, there's an art to that. And so I just encourage people to be as working hard as they are at resting and recovering as they are at working hard. Wow. But we tend to place the focus on working hard because that's the stuff that kind of, you know, people believe is the differentiator. But all you're doing is winning the race to burnout rather than winning the race to high performance.
Yeah, working hard and also working hard for the recovery. That's something that maybe not many people put a lot of respect and intentionality into it. I love that.
Yeah.
Just quickly for people that watching there, thanks so much for hanging out with us. We're going to have a couple more questions, or maybe it's sort of 5 minutes. But if you have any thoughts, ideas, if you learned something from Chris so far, leave it in the comments section right now. And then we're going to have a couple of questions and answers towards the end, sort of the last 10 to 15 minutes. So if you have any thoughts, questions, now it's a great time to put them into the chat box, and then we can pick something out of there. But you also, Chris, I think you've I read this some time ago. You had this big PDF with all kinds of performance rules, or I call them performance principles, if you will.
Yeah.
But I think that you had like 20 of them or 15 or something.
21. Yeah, 21.
21 exactly. Yeah. There was a lot of good ones there. Where would one start if somebody, let's say, that wants to now become a better performer and is already like, let's say, in a certain good level, but want to sort of step it up a little bit.
Yeah.
In relation to those performance rules, what would be something that you could sort of highlight from there or take out for someone who wants to better their game?
Just trying to think through the various ones that lend themselves best. So I think one of them, I think it's Rule 15, but you're on a development program. So most people in the corporate world wait to get invited onto a development program in order to kind of go, oh, it's good, I've been recognized, I'm going to get some special training now. But work is a development program. The opportunity in your diary is there all the time for you to be thinking about, and I keep talking to people about this at the moment anyway, but if this was all just a game and it wasn't really a job, but it was actually, you were like on the Truman Show, you were a star of a kind of a social experiment that was your job. And it was actually an opportunity to see how well you were able to grow and sort of develop within the challenges that were put in front of you in this kind of orchestrated job that you were doing. If you knew that, what would you want to be doing? You'd take control of the narrative. What do you want to be improving at? Who do you want to connect with who become mentors or real great role models? And so if you're on a talent development program, even if there isn't one running in your business at the moment, how is your diary the opportunity for you to be thinking about, right, what strengths have I got that I want to strengthen further? Which strengths do I think are going to become more important in the next phase of my career that I really want to make sure I'm embedding now? We start to think from a foundation of strengths and strengthening them, as well as what are some of the other things that, do you know what? There's a really good opportunity for me to develop a new quality or characteristic that I know is going to become important that maybe I'm not so strong at right now as well. So I think that one of constantly thinking that you're on a talent development program is a really important one, just to, think about your colleagues, your family, people around you. They're great sources of inspiration and learning, but your diary and your job is also an opportunity for you applied to get the job because you fancied it, because you thought there was good opportunity in it. Right now you're in it. How do you develop within it? How do you keep growing? We often talk about the absurd thing in the commercial world where people only ever get put on a performance improvement plan when they've been bad for a while. It's just like, what's that about? Right. Why would you wait for someone to kind of not hit the results that you want in order to put them on a performance improvement plan? Put everyone on a performance improvement plan as soon as they get in the business, because we can't wait to find out how good you are. We're not going to wait for you to be average before we start paying attention to your growth. It really doesn't show that people are very serious about creating a high performance environment. So that those concepts are ones to start with, and within that there's the strengths philosophy and remember, what got you there in the first place. And what I guess the second, the other ones that are really important, I think, are numbers 2 and 3. Number 2 is love the one you're with, which is the conditions that you're in are the conditions that you're in. And so if you can fall in love with the conditions that you've got as a stimulus for you to grow, you can go, you can find a much healthier attitude towards those conditions, which athletes have to do all the time. It's a lot easier to win the world championship of complaining about your conditions than it is to actually take the conditions, understand them, grow, and then perform regardless of the conditions. So that attitude towards conditions is massive. And the third one is be boring, which is do the basics really well. Just know that there are some things that you're going to, if you just keep being boring about the basics of your performance, you'll always have that very solid foundation.
Yeah.
So within the conditions, and you're on a development plan, those three together just combine really nicely to help you have that solid foundation of confidence that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. The third one, probably be boring. That's not something that many people like to hear. But
high performance is pretty dull. It's doing the basics and sticking with them and never assuming that they're as good as they might be.
Yeah, I love that. I interviewed someone, Ruth Godian, some time back, and she wrote a book about success factors, and she interviewed a lot of high performers and top athletes, and one of her main success factors was a solid foundation, which is so true. I call it that sort of baseline, if you will, and that's where you operate. But when we look at these people that stand up on the podiums and are on top of the business world, we only look at obviously the top of the iceberg and see like, want to be there. And then when it comes about like, okay, what was that performance made of? 90% or even more than 90% probably is that boring foundational
the basic. Yeah. Well. So I was working with some folks from the helicopter emergency medical service a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about basically in a helicopter taking hospital care to people who were, if they didn't get there or otherwise got pretty limited life expectancy. And they spoke, Gareth Davis, who set it up, he spoke about one of the early shifts in thinking that they made, which was actually about taking the example of sort of, Olympic gymnastics, where, the highest score that could be got was a 9.7, but for the final three, there was three other qualities that the gymnast scored on, one of which is virtuosity. The doing of the normal at a level of virtuosity. It's just kind of, you just see the basics done in such an exquisite way. So in their out of hospital treatment, they just started focusing on the exquisite execution of the small details of how they would set out equipment in order to carry out a procedure, and doing that in the virtuosity of that in any number of circumstances. And that's where, yes, it is the brilliant basics, but there's still a beauty to someone who does the basics with an art and a flair and a fingerprint that is theirs, and you kind of go, that is the basics, which is underpinning their performance capability, and they'll take great pride in that as well. But it sets the foundation for other brilliance to be put on top of it.
I love that, especially the last nuance as you mentioned. That's sets up the foundation for everything else to flourish from there. The thing that comes to my mind, I used to travel a lot in Japan and looking at those Japanese gardens, and the level of, and this is a big word for me, level of mastery that you see over there from those really simple tasks. That's something to look up to. But the same thing goes in the top performers as well. They do those basics so beautifully well that it's enjoyable to watch it when the basics are done to a prestigious level.
And it takes minimal effort.
Exactly.
It's incredibly exquisite execution without too much effort, which means capacity is available to sort of put the bigger effort to the stuff that requires it as well. So there's a beautiful efficiency in that mastery as well.
Yeah. On that same token, something interesting. And you mentioned about the gymnastist, and I think it was maybe a Norwegian professional gymnastist, and I was watching this interview, and he said that from the physical standpoint, but then we can sort of expand on this idea that he said that in a physical standpoint, the injuries happen on the weakest point of the body, and it is obviously for the gymnastics. And I started thinking about this sort of the weakest link idea. And then obviously you talked about like building strength and building sort of working our strengths.
Yeah.
But how do you see that then play out, like working our weaknesses? Some people say like, forget the weaknesses, only build on the strengths. But then now, especially, I think that we oftentimes we do break from that weakest link. how much you would work on that, or either maybe if it's something that you can drop out completely, then that may be another idea. But
yeah, I think it's important to know that you are looking to raise the upper level of your performance by making your strength stronger, and you are looking to reduce the sort of the lower level of your worst performance by identifying things that will hold you back if you don't manage to improve them, because there'll always be an Achilles heel. I think for me, it's the sequencing. Understand and celebrate the strengths and strengthen them in order to then understand the value that seeking to see if a weakness can become a strength will add. Okay, so if we only ever focus on reducing the weaknesses, we will become better at not having a bad day. And for some people that might be reassuring. For a heart surgeon, I'm pretty happy if you're really good at not having a bad day. So I'm all for that in the right context. But it's what's the combination of the two for you. Keep understanding and valuing and strengthening the strengths, whilst being able to identify those areas that aren't strong enough that if you allow them to stay at that level will hold you back. But it's actually an overall game of strengthening everything, but just from different positions. But you want to make sure that the entire blend, the entire recipe, is helping you be fit for purpose.
Right.
And that's where you're looking at, based upon where I might be able to play tactically, what I might be able to do, in terms of the way in which I sort of, bring other art into the performance. Can I offset the likelihood of a weakness being exposed? But ultimately, I think, on the day of an Olympic final, if you've got people who are going in excited to find out how well they can use their strengths, they're probably going to look forward to the performance and perhaps emotionally get a different experience than those who are really worried their coach is going to criticize them for displaying a weakness in the most important moment of their professional, their Olympic career to date. I think it's think about the role that strengths and weaknesses will play in the moments that matter to you, and build your relationship with them accordingly.
Yeah, I think, finding that balance, as you talk a lot about the input output, but also the strengths and weaknesses, and when and where to strengthen and work on each. I think that's when the true sort of knowledge and experience comes to play, and knowing when to work on and what. That's a good one.
Yeah, there's a quote that I quote on a lot of these ones. So I think it was Skinner, the famous for conditioning research in psychology, operant conditioning. So said that education is that which remains after what has been learned is forgotten. And I often think about that from a performance perspective. So technique or skill is that which remains after what has been coached is forgotten. So if you forget what's in place, if you couldn't actually remember how to do something, but everything in your brain still allowed it to happen, what have you created so that you can just forget with freedom because you know what's going to come to the fore? And that's what we're trying to do here. If we're too worried about the weakness getting in the way, or we're too worried about will the strength be strong enough, we maybe try and overthink it rather than trusting that we can let the performance come to us in what we've built. So we can forget and perform with trust and freedom and enjoy with curiosity, seeing how well we can create, whatever happens in that particular moment. Because, we tend to know what the outcome is that we want.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, there's been a lot what we've covered today. Thanks already so much for your time. There's a nice comment from Shirley who really enjoyed our conversation today already. What about, just to kind of wrap it up a little bit, maybe we can, let's put it this way, just for personal interest. What are you personally working on right now when it comes to your own performance? Is there any idea or element that you are wanted to get better?
So at the moment, a lot of what I'm doing relates to team effectiveness and collaboration, and looking to help teams build behaviors and approaches to their teamwork that allows them to keep getting better at being the team they need to be through how they work together.
Right.
And a lot of that also relates to encouraging teams to celebrate the diversity that exists within their teams, because high performance really comes from sort of allowing the diverse and different personalities, experience, cultural backgrounds. If we can allow those differences to come in to help blend towards delivering a shared objective that we're trying to work towards, and we can keep conversations going that allow each of us to bring our best selves into the conversation, I think that unlocks something really important, that the team is constantly looking to improve its team dynamic rather than the team is worried about the results that it's delivering. So there's so much focus on psychological safety at the moment, but that's all about a result, and people trying to work backwards from the scoreboard and hoping they're not the one to blame for it, and a team not being set up properly in the first place to take on the challenge of pursuing success together. So I'm really trying to grapple with, how do we make this stuff practical in the day-to-day running of teams? How do we help teams really keep having the right shared focus, building a shared purpose? How do we allow individual brilliance and diversity to be celebrated, but united in a way that we keep building our effectiveness? We don't think it's done. We don't do a psychological safety workshop and that's it. We're actually behaving in such a way that our enjoyment, our passion, our satisfaction, our freedom, our safety, our confidence, our ambition, they keep growing through the ongoing relations and sort of interactions that we're having as well. So I'm just trying to find more and more practical ways of, making that concept accessible for teams. And it's easier with some teams than others, but it's, making the whole greater than the sum of the parts is, I guess it goes back to the rowing stuff, which is what it was often about. The people in the singles had it right because they just had to manage the relationship with themselves. It was, as soon as you start getting the crew boats, it becomes a really interesting sort of human performance challenge of a different nature.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot that, at least for me personally, that I learned a lot from sports world. Like, because when you're in the team, there's a lot less of that ego. Of course, there are some for sure, but when you have this shared, and you're in the heat of the battle, it's everybody's pushing towards the same goal, if you will. And when we can bring those ideas and sort of frameworks from the world of sport into the business world, I think there's a lot that we can learn for, this business settings as well from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, love it. Thank you so much for your time, Chris. It's been fascinating conversation. I personally learned a lot. I have a whole page of notes here and stuff. Where can people follow you? Where do we learn? I know that you're active on LinkedIn, and you got Planet K2. Where do you hang out the most online?
So definitely LinkedIn. If people want to kind of follow up any of these concepts, attached to Planet K2, we've got theperformanceroom.co.uk. There's loads of open access material on there, which kind of builds on a lot of the stuff that I've shared today as well. But I'm probably most active on LinkedIn in terms of sharing thoughts and linking to some of the content on the Performance Room, as well as the rest of the team at Planet K2 as well. So, LinkedIn, great place to sort of come and interact, and the Performance Room, great place to go and consume in your own time.
Love it. I'll drop those links here in the chat and also the podcast as well. So thank you so much, Chris. Have a fantastic rest of the Monday, and it's been a great start for everybody's week, and definitely my week as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation. Pleasure to share some time with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.